Black veteran orders. Steak, waitress, secretly slips him. Few words that stops him cold. The diner buzzed with the easy hum of conversations, silverware clinking against plates, and the smell of sizzling steaks drifting through the air. An older, black man in a weathered cap took his seat at a corner booth, just another customer on a quiet evening. But beneath the surface of this ordinary scene, something far darker was about to unfold. When the waitress finally approached with her notepad, she leaned close, lowering her voice. What she whispered made his hand freeze mid-air, his glass trembling as if the words themselves carried a weight too heavy to bear. In that instant, the entire night changed. He was a veteran. Years of service etched lines into his face, the kind that told silent stories of sacrifice, of deserts crossed and battles endured. His cap bore the insignia of the unit he had once proudly served with, a small reminder of the life he had lived and the freedoms he had fought to protect. Now, back home, he lived quietly, finding comfort in simple routines, morning walks, church on Sundays, and the occasional treat of dining out. The diner he chose that evening was familiar, a place filled with warm light and friendly chatter, where families gathered and travelers paused for rest. The menu was straightforward, the kind of comfort food he appreciated. He ordered the same meal nearly every time, a steak, fries, and greens, washed down with a cold drink. As he settled into his booth, he felt the weight of stares. Subtle at first, almost dismissible. A couple glanced his way and quickly looked down at their menus. A man at the counter muttered something under his breath, the kind of thing not meant to be heard, yet sharp enough to pierce through the air. He had grown used to moments like this, being judged not for who he was, but for the color of his skin. Still, tonight, he brushed it off. This was his time, his meal, his peace. The waitress approached, her notepad clutched tightly in one hand. She seemed nervous, her eyes darting across the room before meeting his. When she leaned closer, her words carried more than just a message. They carried a warning. Her words lingered in his mind like an echo he couldn't silence. It wasn't the sort of thing a waitress would normally say. It was a secret slipped into the folds of an ordinary evening. Suddenly, everything around him felt different. The cheerful chatter in the diner now seemed forced, the laughter hollow, and the glances from other tables carried an unmistakable edge. He thought back to his years in uniform, the long nights of standing guard in hostile lands, the promises made to his country, that freedom and equality were worth defending. Yet here he was, years later, fighting a different kind of battle, a silent one, fought not with weapons, but with dignity. The waitress moved about her duties, but he noticed her hesitation whenever she passed his table. It was as if she wanted to say more but couldn't risk being overheard. Every so often her eyes flicked toward a group of men near the counter, their hushed conversations stopping whenever she drew near. He caught their smirks, their deliberate stares, the way they leaned back with the arrogance of people who thought they were untouchable. His drink sat before him, amber liquid catching the light. Yet suddenly he felt uneasy lifting it to his lips. He thought about what she had whispered, how sometimes a simple warning could mean the difference between safety and danger. He pushed the glass slightly away, his appetite dimming, though his hunger remained. The moments dragged, stretching into a heavy silence broken only by the clatter of dishes and the low murmur of voices. Memories rushed back uninvited, the insults hurled at him when he first returned from war, the jobs that turned him away despite his service, the neighborhoods where doors seemed to close the moment he walked by. And yet, he had carried on. Because to stop was to let them win. But tonight felt different. Tonight he was being tested again, not by strangers in a foreign land, but by his own neighbors, his own countrymen. The weight of his service, his sacrifices pressed against the reality before him. He wondered how many others had sat in similar booths, faced with the same choice, endure in silence, or stand firm. The waitress finally returned, placing his plate carefully on the table. Her hand lingered a second longer than usual, her eyes filled with something unspoken. He knew then that whatever truth she had tried to shield him from was not just about food. It was about respect, about dignity, about a system of cruelty that thrived in silence. Black veteran orders steak. Waitress secretly slips him few words that stops him. Cold, he looked down at the plate. Steak perfectly seared, fries golden, greens neatly arranged. On the surface, it looked normal, inviting even. But his decision had already been made. He wouldn't touch it. The men at the counter watched him closely, waiting. He could feel their anticipation, the cruel satisfaction they were ready to claim. They wanted to see him fall into their trap, to become the butt of their whispered jokes. But he had faced far worse than this. He had endured storms that would have broken them in an instant. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed the plate aside. His hand remained steady, though his chest carried the storm of emotions rising within. The waitress caught the movement and gave the faintest nod, her relief almost hidden. In that exchange, no words were spoken, but a truth was shared. He had understood, and she had done her part. He rose from the booth, his back straight, his cap tilted forward like a soldier preparing to march. The room quieted, tension filling the space where laughter had once been. The men at the counter smirked, but their smirks faltered as they realized he would not give them what they wanted. He paid for the untouched meal, leaving the bills neatly on the table. It was not weakness, it was a statement. He would not consume what was tainted, nor allow their cruelty to define him. His dignity was worth far more than a plate of food. As he stepped toward the door, the air seemed lighter, though the burden of the moment remained. His silence spoke, louder than any confrontation ever could. The night air outside was cool, carrying the faint hum of passing cars and the distant chatter of people living lives untouched by what had just transpired. He breathed deeply, his chest rising with the weight of memories, pain, and pride. The waitress's courage lingered in his thoughts. In a world where silence often felt safer, she had chosen to speak, to warn, to act. And that small act of humanity had preserved more than just his health. It had preserved his dignity. He knew the men inside the diner would forget the incident by morning, brushing it off as another night of amusement at someone else's expense. But for him, it was a reminder of the battles still being fought every day, battles unseen by most, yet felt deeply by those who carried the scars of history. Walking away, he thought of the generations to come, children who deserved better, a world where respect wasn't conditional, and service to one's country wasn't repaid with suspicion or scorn. He had given so much for the idea of freedom. Tonight proved that freedom still had a long way to go, but he also knew this. Dignity is not theirs to take. It belongs to those who claim it, who stand firm in the face of hatred and walk away with their heads held high. And so he walked, each step echoing a truth he hoped others would hear. The fight for respect doesn't always happen on battlefields. Sometimes it happens in diners, in schools, in workplaces. Sometimes it happens in silence. The question remains for all who hear his story. When the moment comes, will you have the courage to stand against injustice, even in its quietest forms?